They say consistency is the key to success, and we're consistently back and talking again. This is round two of but we are sure there will be many conversations. This is Joseph again.
And this is Caleb.
Yeah, so last week we introduced a slew of topics. We spent long time talking about the government shutdown. We spent a long time talking about the redistricting efforts that already happened in Texas are going to be up on the ballot in November in California. And we also talked about specifically North Carolina's Republicans' attempt to redistrict in preparation for the midterms in 2026. Caleb had mentioned that he was going to be going to Raleigh for a special vote, even though the budget had been passed. So, we'll start with you, and we'll talk about what happened this week in the General Assembly, how it happened, and then yeah, we'll start there.
Yeah, so much like you said, we got called back. So North Carolina, the Senate and the House got called back to look at congressional lines. And so what we thought was going to happen essentially happened in that they introduced new maps that were looking to reshape mainly Congressional District 1. So
Mhm.
Congressional District 1 in North Carolina is held by a congressman named Don Davis. It's one of the few Democratic held seats.
Oh,
The part that was sort of surprising was how brazen our Republican senators were. We had questioning in committee. So you go to the elections committee where they initially present the maps. I'm not in this committee.
mhm.
My other counterparts are where you have a list of questions that you're going to ask who drew the maps. There was one senator who claimed responsibility, which was Senator Ralph Heiss.
Mhm.
He represents, blanking on the name, the county mainly in the mountains. I believe he might be like the deputy majority of the Republican Party. So he claimed ownership of it. And his first line when he got up there was, "We're doing this to give Trump a congressional seat." So normally you prepare a line of questioning to get at the real cause that you redrawn because it's abnormal to do it in the old decade. But the
Mhm.
fact that they were so brazen to just bluntly be like, "Oh, we're doing this to give Trump an additional seat. He won the presidential election. He has a mandate. He deserves to implement the policies that he wants to implement." That was extremely shocking for a lot of us because, I mean, at least they're not going to lie about it. My theory is that they intended to lean on the political so they can lean away from race. So a lot of our question was, did you look at racial data? They said no. Very hard to believe that the black counties happen to be the ones targeted and removed from the congressional district. And so, um, yeah, I mean, that's sort of the place that we got to. So the House voted for it again. I mean, you had, some of these goofballs just getting up there saying how much they love Trump, best president um, in my lifetime, which is okay to say. I don't know why you're saying you love him, but it sort of got to this weird. The majority of our speeches and questioning got just behind the idea of like patriotism and this moniker that traditional Republicans held, which is states' rights, how it should be separated from federal rights. So
Right.
here to have a federal government and the leader of the federal government essentially request that a congressional map be drawn, and you just oblige in the middle of the decade of that. And
Mhm.
so, kind of part of what I was reflecting is, next year we're celebrating the 200th anniversary of the United States, and
Mhm.
there's been planning made, especially in the North Carolina General Assembly. We have a commission on the 250 anniversary that's looking at putting together parades and this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
It's like so funny that patriotism and our forefathers are oftentimes like fetishized by our some of my colleagues, where we constantly want to have events where we cosplay and dress up like with the founding fathers, but
Right.
the same ideals that they essentially pushed, we're finding, well, what's comes to shove, you don't really believe in those ideas. I just don't. I can't be
Well,
convinced Paul Revere or somebody like that who is like actively fighting against authoritarian figure. And now we're with some of our counterparts full of like this. And so Hey, I'd say something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for the synopsis. I want to hear that fuzzy background. Um, okay, so it's just your area. So a few things. I think your last point regarding patriotism and the founding fathers, I want to harp on a little bit. So, right, I think there's two ways to look at it. I think in 1776, the Revolutionary War, right, 76 to like 81, maybe is when the American Revolutionary War, and I may be wrong on those numbers. Maybe it's 1775 to 70, 17. Anyways, I think at that time the patriotism was around, like there was no semblance of a United States, right? There were colonies, so there was really no framework. It was a confederation at the time. Like we're just going to get together and fight against this entity that is imposing taxation on us. Right, that's really the crux of what that conflict was. It was getting overbearing. Like they couldn't control the means of their own production. But I would say during the Constitutional Convention time, well, let me see, roughly 1787 to I want to say 1789. Again, we can double check these numbers. But somewhere around those days, I think there was a very because of what they experienced with the king, there was a very much intention on not having a federal government who was going to be overbearing on the states. So the idea that what folks are doing now regarding the deconstruction of the federal hegemony over politics to go to the states, I do think that in part that's in line with what the folks at the Constitutional Convention were intending. But I don't think the way that in which it is occurring, right? Like saying, okay, we are doing this to add seats to this national board. That is kind of contradictory. It's very contradictory that they are using the founding fathers and patriotism and states' rights as a way to bolster the presidential agenda of the executive, right? So it's kind of like having your cake and eating it too. So that's what I would say. I think the the idea that they're using they're weaponizing an ideal they're misusing an ideal. And there's more to talk about the founding fathers and essentially how they came to agree to those first 10 constitutional amendments and what slavery meant and what slavery meant to the founding of this nation. But yeah, so it's happened. It's over. It's what it's going to be, at least in the foreseeable future. Again, we talked a little bit about last time what the Supreme Court can do here. I'm not sure if the Democratic Party is planning on having litigation at the state to look at
Yeah,
what just
also
happened.
filed.
Okay, so they filed a lawsuit.
Yep.
I hope. I mean, I don't know if it's going to if. Well, we'll see what the docket is like for the Supreme Court of the state. But I do know that the U.S. Supreme Court is looking at a provision of Voting Rights Act that could essentially nullify the arguments that folks are making around some of these redistricting. So
Yeah.
it's all happening at the same time. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, much like you said, I think it was Louisiana had a similar redistricting rules changed and ended up in the Supreme Court. So the main sort of argument that the folks in Louisiana had made is that this is racial gerrymandering and
Yeah.
it's goes against the Voting Rights Act. I think Article 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And so
Mhm.
if you look at the transcript of how the legal arguments are being made, it's not looking too good for anybody that believes in civil rights pretty much in voting.
Yeah.
So, but
Mhm.
we are aware of lecture. We are aware of that going on. So we altered our questioning, our lines of questioning for that. It doesn't mean it's going to pan out, but I believe there is a legal strategy to try to challenge some of these in court.
Mm.
So we'll see. You
Yeah.
know, we'll see.
I mean, by the time the Supreme Court kind of gives their ruling on it, it's going to be
No,
like.
yeah, we're sitting on these. But the thing is, like, so it really is a science or an art to how you draw the maps because by law you have to fit in a specific number of folks. So I think it's like 350,000 or something like that. Actually, no, that'd be more than that. into a district. So when you alter one, you have to alter other. And just with demographic changes, we're seeing that. I mean, there's more congressional seats that we can really compete in. There are more seats that are traditionally been held by red that we can now sort of challenge. And from my understanding, even though that congressional seat is changing, Don Davis is still going to run for re-election. But again, he already won when it was a Trump-supported district.
Mm,
And so, and we'll hopefully see the DNC back up actual funds for him to win the election.
yeah.
Democrats start to challenge the other sort of district. And so, not going to just pray that the courts uphold some of the cases. So
Yeah.
ultimately the fight has to be won at the ballot box. And that's why it's so much more important for us to go to literally every corner of the state to challenge every single seat.
Yeah. I was listening to I think Ezra Klein and some of the folks from Pod Save America is talking exactly about this idea that it's okay. I mean, like let's run in a Democratic. I mean, excuse me, in a Republican district. Why not? Right? I think it's gotten to the point where folks are conceding without even trying. So yeah, this might again. What else are folks gonna do? Right? It's capitulation, or we can, folks can try and um and challenge some of these things head on. Because I don't think they're expecting that. But I mean, ultimately, what does this mean for the electorate, though? For the folks, yeah,
Yeah, that's before we get off this redistricting, why that is so important and how like having a group of constituents that you're responsible for is important because it leads to our discussions about whether it's mental health, healthcare, everything that we're trying to fight for, whether it's civil rights, etc. Because if you just look at Congress, roughly only 10% of the congressional seats are really competitive. And what happens if you're essentially ensured that you're going to have your seat? There's going to be no competition. Well, like you look at this either government shutdown. You look at even in the state right now where we have no budget, like you mentioned earlier. Folks are not incentivized to really go and do the work because who's going to try me during the election? Like it's
mhm,
already solid red. I'm not going to
mhm,
have any competition. So what
mhm,
people don't realize is that gerrymandering, the second or third order effects of having congressional and state senate seats that aren't competitive,
mhm,
means that you have a pool of politicians where the incentive for actually doing anything is removed.
mhm,
And so you're relying on that senator for caring about their constituents just off the strength. And
mhm,
I don't think that was a good way to govern. I think
mhm,
every politician has to be threatened that every 2 years you're going to have competition. And if you don't deliver or if you don't make an effort, then you're not obviously not going to win the election. And so
mhm,
it's a much broader conversation about um, competition in some of these seats, but redistricting
mhm.
are the number one reason why some of these seats go unchallenged and why these politicians go unchallenged.
Yeah, that is, and this is what the founding fathers were trying to avoid, right? This idea that we the people of the United States of America, in order to establish a more perfect union. I'm not going to say the preamble, but it's at the time, like we can look at what was happening in the, and I'm mincing words here because of what slavery was at that time, though. So I don't want to give too much credit, but in theory, as far as democracy was concerned, right? Because John Locke was living in a system of just straight, not feudalism, but living in a system where there was a king, and there was a parliament, but it wasn't really as well vested. So his ideas about what democracy could look like was still theory. So at that time, in the late 18th century, the United States of America, was the only kind of major world power that was under this new thing of electoral, democracy, and whatever that means, right? And how far we come from that is interesting from the tenets, right? So I think the reason why there's so much to me there's so much like anguish and concern and disappointment with the American system forever has been that the ideals, like this idea that we the people, say everybody's inalienable rights, that is what you would want in the society, right? But when those things aren't happening for certain people, for certain groups of people, we talk about the Native Americans, we talk about the Black folks, we talk about women for a long time. That's why people are up in arms. Like we need to live up to these ideals. And today I don't think we're living up to those ideals either. Okay, so let's transition, a central list of topics. Let's get into this academics grassroots kind of conversation. I think when you sent that note over yesterday, I immediately, was excited to talk about that because that's something that's been on my mind for a long time, at least in my new role. So yeah, tell me what.
Yeah, I intro it because I'm more interested to hear your perspective. So, but the general topic is there's been kind of an online discussion. It's been a while, but I think there's this general view, right? As we're stereotyping sides and people here, but there's just this general view that there are maybe some podcasts that exist where or some people that exist where you can speak from the grassroots about how to strengthen Black folks. There are people on the ground that do the work, put together community center events, put back giveaways, constantly marching, the ones who organize the march. And then at times there has been another way to also contribute, more so the academic route. And so whether it's contribution in academic papers, the articulation of kind of what's going on in society, sort of the rigor that you apply to okay, how do we compare what's going on to a kid in Palestine versus a Black person here? So this general space has been taken out by a class of oftentimes academics. And there's been general discussion and maybe even a rift in the middle where you oftentimes have seen both sniping on one side.
Oh, no.
And you see it on Twitter all the time. And I think recently there was a podcast that made comments about the dumbing down of America as they spoke about another podcast. And they said, there's groups of people who are essentially making it cool to be dumb and to not articulate yourself well, etc.
Okay.
So there's another group of podcasts that shot back and they essentially said, you are looking down on other Black folks who may contribute to the fabric of the United States, but maybe they don't have the accolades. Maybe they don't speak or articulate themselves as you can. Maybe they can't recite Baldwin off a win, but that doesn't mean that they're not contributors to civil rights, all of us in general. So there's been this giant discussion, and you occupy a space of both. And so I wanted to kind of perspective on it.
Okay, and this is specifically within the black thinking space, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh well, so I'll start by saying first, I think we need both ways of engaging, whether that's through this scientific method and through just people power, right, on the ground. That's what I'll say. And then I'll say this as well. I think I've been in school. I was in school for the majority of my 20s, master's and then with the doctoral program. When you're in those spaces and you're only really around folks who are in the same kind of experience you are, writing papers and doing literature reviews and conducting studies and forming dissertations, the circle shrinks and the frame of mind is very much limited to what is happening within your framework. And I think that sometimes when you're in that mind space, but you're also theorizing about the world that other people inhabit, you may have a conflicting set of goals to where when you're theorizing about something, you are telling folks that the way I see the world is the way I see it. And therefore, I'm applying this theory frame of work to what's happening in real life. But you're forgetting that people do not understand the theory and the framework with which you are applying these things to their lives, right? So a perfect example is, let's talk about the education system, specifically curriculum design, specifically school funding. Where should money go, right? That's been a large topic in the academic education policy space is around funding Okay, like how much is too much? Um, does after school work? Does preschool work? All those things, right? And it's all based on theory. But we never often do is ask the people, one, who are implementing it, so educators, and two, the people who are receiving the benefits, the parents and students. You never ask them, those people. And failing to do so, we create this world where the rules that are made without the people who are going to be impacted by the leader, right? So that's so and then going back to the folks in the academy, the theories that you're saying about the world you're making it without the people who are in the world, right? So then there's this it automatically creates this mechanism where if I'm telling you about your life and you're not involved in me telling about your life, it's automatically a place of you're casting something on me because you didn't even give me the opportunity, the agency to come speak on this thing.
Mhm.
So that's my preamble. But I'll say I have been very humbled. I've been humbled to no ends in this new role that I'm in, where I'm meeting with folks who are doing work. Man, I was talking about, we're talking about labor unions and working rights, right? That's theory, like, oh, Marxism, all that. Okay, and then this guy was like, yeah, I've been doing this for 30 years in Florida, right? We organizing around. We did a rainbow coalition around workers' rights in Florida. We got a lot of success in the early 2000s. We even, were instrumental in getting Rubio and DeSantis in office because they ran on this like rainbow workers' rights stuff, and they got in and dismantled all of the work that I've done for 30 years, right? And I'm over here like, yeah, like we need to do a rainbow coalition. That's the only way we'll get our voting rights back. And he's like, yeah, okay, I did that, and I was actually door knocking. I was actually in the community doing community talks, community conversations, voting rights education. I was in there doing education campaigns, and I'm telling you that we got this shit done, and then they just got dismantled, right? So then I'm like, okay, impossible. You talk about imposter syndrome. People talk about imposter syndrome in the academy. I had imposter syndrome in real life because what I thought I knew, what I was writing, what I was riffing, what I was theorizing was very disconnected from what was happening on the grassroots level. So now in this new experience that I'm having, I implore my academic partners, my academic friends to say, hey, listen, like we're over here we're talking about Marxism ideology. I was literally in this conversation last night with somebody. He was talking about Leninist, Marxist. I was like, bro, like what you're basically saying is that we need to make sure we're having this conversation on a regular level. You're saying that people should own the means of their own labor and should own the means of their production. Simple. Like you all these terms, isms. Let's like you're trying to like confuse the reality of the theory is people should own the means of production. It didn't work that way because when you centralize means of production and labor, the people who are in charge of it start hoarding. So then you create a class that you were theorizing you weren't trying to create, and then you also kill people and you send them to jail to work to do labor camps. So then you repeat so I'm like this is a simple conversation you can have, but you're throwing all these terms out to confuse people, and then when people don't understand, you tell them you need to read more. So it is very much. I'm humble because I think I did definitely partake in some of that academic jousting. I'm not saying I haven't done it and that I don't do it sometimes, but I'm learning that, man, I'm learning that I can't even ever really look down on the grassroots folk or even take away. I think they're doing a real work. Put it simply, I think those folks on the grassroots who can articulate their points in a very succinct, quick way without confusing people. Those are the folks to me who are the best communicators. And even additionally, the folks who do know the high high verbiage but it can also translate to the folks is, to me, the best way to do it. So this academic versus grassroots thing, I think is very unfortunate as the Black community or whoever these podcasters are to be saying people are dumbing things down or blah blah blah. I think that's a critique that a lot of our civil rights leaders, we talk about Kwame Ture, we talk about Malcolm, we talk about, Fannie Lou Hamer. I don't know if she ever went to college, right? Fannie Lou Hamer, the woman in Mississippi who led the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party, who got who created a new party and was nearly able to get seated in the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey in '64. She didn't have a college degree. And we can argue she did more than a lot of the folks at the time who had college degrees in that time in Spain. Because you gotta remember the Voting Rights Act, like the Civil Rights Act, didn't pass in '64 when she was doing that.
Mhm.
I think it passed later in the summer after. I don't know. Actually, I mean, it may have passed by then. But she was doing things in a way that wasn't. And I'm getting off topic, but what I'm trying to illustrate is that sometimes folks think that the big words are what gets people to move, right? Because at the end of the day, we want people to move. We want people to go to the ballot. We want people to get more engaged and more and get more informed. And you do that by connecting with people where they are, and where they are doesn't mean you coming down to meet people. It just you mean you connect with people on a human level. And
Mm.
oftentimes, you turn people off by using words that it could insinuate that they're maybe not able to communicate with you on the same pathway, right? So that's my point to that. I think there needs to be a humbling of the folks who are using these highfalutin words.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think, yeah, I mean, for me, I just interpret it as the more complicated somebody sounds, the more I don't think that they know what they're saying.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think you always hear that quote, but it's like the mark of a charlatan to take something simple and make it more complex, but it's the mark of a genius to take something complex and make it simple. And
Mhm.
so you're not able to articulate your idea in
Mhm.
a more simple way. Sure, I mean, there are words that are more accurate, the more sophisticated that you can use.
Right.
Whenever you're throwing a bunch of isms in one singular sentence, it's just kind of like, oh, they probably don't really understand. So
Mhm.
they're compensating by, throwing out a bunch of words and hoping that is get lost. So
Mhm.
I do think that there's definitely some of that. And to your point, yeah, the study of like the majority of your time is just spent on both theorizing and reading historical narratives. I don't understand how that's really progress. There's a certain point to where you should be informed enough to recognize certain patterns in society. But I think people have taken that to the extreme in that I must know these events that took place at this date. And somehow that's going to inform me on what to do. When in reality, the event is going to inform you on what to do. It's just do it. It's just going to err its charm. So you have to actually do something.
Mhm.
So, and I think that's where I've oftentimes seen and gotten frustrated seeing folks that want to continue in this space,
Mhm.
but don't necessarily, they spend a little bit too much time, whether it's in like academia, they need to come outside, you need to contribute outside. Like it's great that, you know, Dr. King had a doctorate. I'm sure it actually helped him inform his ideas. I mean, clearly in his writing, some of it is really God given, but you can see it in his writing. But what we know him for is that he was outside. He was making it happen. He was a man of, he had a bias towards action. And I think sometimes that's not often seen. Like commentating what we're doing in podcasts and articulating it is a net positive, I would think, and telling folks what's going on. But at the end of the day, how we contribute is what we're doing in our actual jobs, what we do in our spare time. That's how I think that we should measure how we're helping folks, not just a general description of the temperature of America, which people pass off as action. And so, yeah, I agree to that point. I think, you know, I do like also seeing more folks, more like academics in some of these popular Black podcast spaces, because I think, again, it's a group of people we need to get at. Like you need to, you don't, I see it in my political party all the time where I have events and it's the same political insiders. Like those are not the folks I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to go to the folks that don't necessarily vote, that aren't involved in the political process. Those should be the people that we're taking our message towards. And the same thing, we should be going to places that aren't extremely comfortable, not necessarily dangerous, but comfortable as in there's a chance that these people don't even share my values and ideals, but it's incumbent upon me to share it with them. And I think that those folks that are oftentimes doing it are the folks at the grassroots that are knocking on doors and that are, passing around paperwork and that can tell you whether an idea is good from experience, not versus like they read it somewhere. So, but I do think you want a balance of both, and both of folks are completely needed in the spaces that we operate. So, but
Yeah,
yeah, I think it was a very interesting discussion. And I think both of us have had experience. You more so because you're at the academia, um, and now moving over to like the grassroots and even postgraduate. And people
yeah,
need to realize your PhD was a tool set, like or your master's, your bachelor is a tool set for you to contribute in the real world.
yeah,
That is not the end all be all. That credential was to get
yeah,
you
yeah.
out here, and it's a tool. It's not the, you know what I'm saying? It's not the end goal. People think
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
it.
I mean, two things there. And I agree with most of what you said. I think, yeah, I'll talk about the last one. Yeah, to me, the way I looked at my skill set, I knew there was things that I needed to fortify as far as like my analysis and the more mundane stuff like data, looking at data, what does it look like to have a even to understand what data is and how somebody puts it together. I thought that was going to be important, and it has proven to be important as far as just like understanding when some of these more peer reviewed papers come to I'm engaging with them, right? So that was a point that I knew I needed to get more skills on. And obviously, you could folks can do that on their own free time, but I think the structured way is what I needed, and I needed to really understand the to me the tenets. But I think I needed to also have a moment to read and understand the tenets behind, like you know what the theories and the thing that inform and the words that people have said in the past that have been applied right on at the political level, policy level. So so those are the reasons why I ultimately decided to do the PhD, and because I wanted to be able to, like you said, better inform how I do my work. We now at my new role and just going forward, I don't want to. I always enjoy coming in with a basis of knowledge. Like, okay, whether we're talking about commercial real estate stuff or we're talking about climate, I want to come in with something. So that's why I think it's important to do that piece. And
100%.
then I was gonna close by saying I think knowing your role is important. Knowing your role and knowing what cards you're playing. And knowing to stay in your lane and do the thing that you're doing very well. And then once you have a good handle of what you're doing, now you can start looking, okay, let me see where I can be of assistance. But don't start looking at other people and thinking you can do their job as well, because you've got your thing on automatic on automation. Now you can that's just the humility piece that comes around it. I was in a meeting on Monday around, like, again, cooperative housing, meaning how do we make housing more affordable, but also how do we make people in, like, let's say a building have a stake in the building? Like, how do we transform them from being renters to being folks who own a building community, like as a shared model? And then, I was just sitting back the entire meeting and they were like, oh, you've been quiet. I was like, I'm learning. I'm I'm learning. I don't have anything of substance to give today. I will do my reading and come back and have more of a perspective. But what I can help is with pulling the data together and helping the story be told. Right. So that's knowing your role, understanding it. I think there's a lot of ego involved on the academic side to say, we want to do everything because we read a lot. It's like, no, it's okay. Like, and then they started talking about, oh yeah, we're going to start doing this door knocking campaign. I said, yeah, all right, let me know how that goes, because I said there's I have no temperature for that. But like but I need to like really know that about who I am and how I want to contribute to the struggle, right? So that's what I'll say there to kind of cap that conversation.
Yeah. I think the social sciences in the area that we're playing in politics, and to your point, yeah, that is my there's I think being in the Senate or just some of these meetings, there is a lot of pressure for you to always speak and give your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, and that's my thing. I'm like, I'm not a subject matter expert. I don't want to deliver my campaign speech. Like I see that all the time with politicians when we're behind closed doors, getting in the meat of policy, maybe about affordable housing. Just randomly, somebody delivers I think everybody has a right to a house. Well, I'm just like, bro, we're behind the closed door. This is not a campaign. We're trying to figure out how to make that happen. It's not
Mm,
real. But the pressure of like, I
yeah.
must do something. And I think deep down, and I see this in the social sciences space, there's a deep insecurity of like, do we actually know enough? But are we going to be able to live up to like my campaign speech? Are we going to be able to change the things that we talk about all the time? And I think because sociology, how society allocates resources, etc., it's a bit different than from like a math,
Mhm.
physics perspective.
Yeah.
Like, and it creates so much fuzziness because it's hard. Because
Mhm.
like, it's something as simple as like psychology. You talk about this, but something like 45% of psychology papers can't be replicated, which is like, okay, so those are just opinions. You know what I'm saying? Those aren't consistently held. And at the same time, we're studying psychology or sociology. It's not like how you feel. You're trying to create a pattern match between how a bunch of people feel. So
Mhm.
if your study cannot be replicated, that's not how a bunch of people feel. And this is a giant reduction of psychology here. But
Right.
I think
Right.
you catch my drift. So I see that in poli sci all the time where people will come up with papers. But we're not saying shit. It's really, if you just skip to the summary, it's saying the most basic thing, and that it does not mean knowledge versus really taking a swing. And if you read a physics paper, that's traditionally not going to be the case, especially if it's a nature or something like that. And because it's just hard, because like Richard Feynman, one of those physicists, 20th century, it's just like imagine how hard physics is if every atom has an, and so and that's what we're trying to study here. So it's inherently hard, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't take a proper swing at some of these giant issues and really studying and trying to come up with novel reasons. There's no reason why we're not shooting for it. And so
Mm.
more people have to have a bias towards action. It's just like you can just go and do something. Like you don't need to work in strategy, or you don't need to like. If I was in this position, I would do this. It's just like you could just do it.
Yeah.
Realize how hard it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that that's you can cap off and got to just a couple more topics to hit, but yeah, that that need to, and I feel it every day in a way. I think that need to want to speak up and contribute to shit stuff, even if you don't know it. I think it takes a lot of humility to say, like, you go to the, and that's what I think about the social sciences. I think because it's not physics, because it's not medicine, it's easier for folks to get into the conversation, which is fine. And I think that there's still a method behind what you d- d- because you can't see like the different equations that people do when they're talking about policy. If people sometimes forget that people do have like a method of like studying this thing called policy. So when you're coming to the conversation, your example about affordable housing, it's like, okay, well, everybody deserves good housing access. That is true. But we have somebody who's been doing this for 15 years and developing models.
Mhm.
Again, it's not plus or minus, but like that's still a heavy body of work that needs to be respected, but it's a little bit more difficult to see that. But eventually, what happens in those kind of conversations is clear the person who has the most expertise, and usually it's those who not only have the knowledge, the body of knowledge, but also have the practical knowledge of like, okay, we tried this model and it just didn't work. So that's what I'm learning, and I'm glad I'm in the spaces now where people are doing both. Like, I'm like, man, how y'all have time to do all this? Because y'all reading, and y'all writing, and y'all outside. Like, whoa. And y'all leading these things, right? So it's just like, okay, that's why I'm looking. I'm like, man, I need to find them pockets of time to really move like this. Uh, but yeah, just shout out to the people who can do both. So yeah, let's do government shutdown. It was this is day what? Day 20, 26, 25
Yeah.
of the government shutdown. I think midweek I was hearing states talk about the gap that they will need to not be having to have to fill for some of the social services around WIC, TANF, SNAP if this continues on for like another month. There's healthcare access issues happening again if this continues for another month. But it seems like the Democrats in Washington are not willing to budge, which is interesting. I think I was in Mike Johnson, I believe, said unless Republicans are willing to come and negotiate, we're not going to move on there. Because I mean, I do again agree with the healthcare subsidies and how important that is to our healthcare premiums if you can't access it through federal government or your job.
Yeah.
So yeah, any quick thoughts on the on day 25 or 26?
Yeah. I haven't heard anything new. From even what you said and what I've read on the news, it seems like both sides are just hardening onto their positions, and they don't look like they're going to let up. I know that they're so SNAP. I believe it's this month. You will not say. I have to read the specifics, but I
Yeah,
believe have benefits are going to be cut
yeah.
next month, right before Thanksgiving and the holiday season.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did see one Democratic senator saying that would alter his vote, so he would vote for any bill without the health insurance. So
Yeah,
he's been an interesting character. That's the only new hires, but yeah, from what I heard, the other senators, especially on the Democratic side, seems like they're really gun ho on maintaining their position. And I haven't seen any like polling or like credible signal to suggest who the American people are really blaming.
it's they're blaming both parties, which I was listening to the Daily on Monday, and historically, the government shutdown is blamed on the president. This time, it's blamed on like both parties, and the White House is saying that's good for them because nobody's blaming Trump for it. So that's what the polling is right now. It's kind of evenly split. It's just looking at Congress.
Continues. I can't imagine because I know that Democrats just started sort of the messaging around it. You've been seeing Chuck Schumer and Congressman Jeffries be a lot more aggressive in trying to blame the other side. I wonder how it'll alter because it doesn't seem like it's a hard argument. So just Republicans control, pretty much all of government. So you would think that point should be articulated relatively easily, but you never know with these kind of things, and it's really dependent on the messaging. And so, and I haven't been too happy with Democratic messaging past 6 months. So there really ain't no telling who's going to get
Damn. I meant Chuck Schumer. I said Mike Johnson. I meant, Mike. Yeah, I was thinking about somebody else. I meant Chuck Schumer. Mike Johnson is a
So
Republican.
we'll see. I mean, hopefully there is a resolution that includes shoring up access to healthcare, and we don't want people, especially kicked off their services.
Yeah, and I saw some stuff around JD Vance trying to get more involved in making this stuff come over the line. I need to see what there's a development there. Okay, so government shutdown, and I do a quick on African politics. Yesterday, the Ivory Coast had their elections, and our 84-year-old incumbent seeking this will be his fourth term, which the Constitution does not allow for 4 terms; it allowed for 2. So, earlier last week there were some demonstrations, and the executive branch of government said banned demonstrations for a week, and whoever was involved in demonstrations here and after that ban would serve a 3-year minimum prison sentence. and people have been arrested and they are actively in prison right now for protesting his candidacy again. So they're projected that he's going to win. Like, the election was yesterday. I think they'll come out with the results officially on Monday, but they're projecting his victory. Some of the supporters of the other parties kind of didn't vote because of their candidates being banned from running because of whatever the election committee decided in the Ivory Coast. So yep, we're gonna have an 84-year-old president in a matter of days, confirmed. I think Cameroon, the 94-year-old president, is gonna win again in Cameroon. So that's happening there.
Right.
And then in Madagascar, go ahead.
Sorry, are these 4-year terms for each?
Yeah. And in Madagascar, they had a government overthrow, like a mini coup. Yeah. Over the last couple months, and this was led by the younger folks. They call themselves the Gen Zers, and they want more jobs and more economic development in our country. They asserted and claimed that the former president was not providing benefits in those categories, and so the military took over the government, and then the president fled to France, and then yesterday we learned that he had his citizenship revoked, so he's no longer a citizen of Madagascar. So that's just happening there. And then the new leader appointed a prime minister, but then the Gen Zers didn't like the prime minister, so now they're protesting the new appointee. So Madagascar is going through a lot of things right now. That's not even to say, the Congo and Rwanda situation on the border is still happening. So it's just African politics right now are what they are. So that those presidential candidacies came. Last, you can talk about a little bit more of a trending topic, maybe what's going on with the NBA and Chauncey Billups and Terry Rozier and Damon Jones officially being arrested by the FBI again. To me, listen, I don't know what FBI needs to do or what's on their plate, but I guess this is something that they felt that needed to spend resources on and all that. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
I think there were 2 separate cases. If I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken, the Chauncey Billups thing were for like private poker games that they would play, and Terry Rozier was sports gambling and taking bans, etc. Yeah, people have suggested that the inclusion of the FBI, there's no telling with this FBI, but the inclusion of the FBI might indicate it's a bit bigger than previously expected. I guess just zooming out, I think this is a problem that we're going to see even more as we see some of these betting markets hit the market. And so sports gambling within the past 10 years has essentially been legalized in a lot of the states. We see like DraftKings and a bunch of these services be rolled out. In North Carolina, we actually legalized sports gambling a few years ago as well, year or two. And so you've seen it become a big thing. And even in the state Senate, we're constantly getting reports, especially as of now, in terms of bankruptcies. I think it's something like 20 to 30% of bankruptcies we've seen relatively low indicates some sort of unhealthy sports gambling. So this is going to be a big problem. But I think it's just very interesting to see that where the market goes, because you see new services like Polymarket and Kalshi, which are essentially new markets for the betting line. And then that is separate from your traditional sports bettors of DraftKings, etc. DraftKings, here it is either a casino or the house on making the odds, and we all vote in a traditional, we all gamble in a traditional betting sense.
Okay.
Polymarket and Kalshi are independent markets. We go and we all create the line. There's no house you're competing with. And so we've seen that you can create a market on it. Well, there's a market right now for whether Mondani is going to win the New York City Mayorship. And we've seen that within like a week of a certain activity taking place, the odds on Kalshi and Polymarket have been about 95% right. And you would just think, because if you know something, If you
Mm.
truly have racing, you would bet. And once people see sizable bets, they'd be like, okay, well, maybe this person knows some information.
Mm.
And that's how the odds have been changing. So it's very interesting to see essentially a tokenization and the market being created on so many different things that you can bet on. There's literally like anything, anybody can go in and create a market for something. And so I'm interested to see the implications on like society, what other additional markets this creates, because Poly Market, I believe, I mean, their growth has been, they raised like $1 billion. And then not even 7 months afterwards, they went back to raise at a multiple that was even bigger than the initial. Like 6 months ago, they were at a certain valuation. 6 months later, they were valued at like $12 billion, which suggests that the demand for their application must be there. And so interested to see how that spills in. But yeah, you're going to constantly need to monitor like athletes. And now with the rise of AI, it's getting a lot easier. Like, you know, somebody put in a bet, I think it was on Theodros or allegedly, that it was just an abnormal bet. Somebody bet like 25 grand he wouldn't get a rebound, or like nobody ever bets that on a player. And so it would cause you to investigate a little bit more. I think you're going to have to start being on the lookout for stuff like that.
Yeah, and well, Grace analysis. I'm not familiar with those new ventures, but that's really interesting. People creating odds instead of the house. And maybe the model that we've been running with the house creating the odds, maybe that's something to be refurbished. Yeah, and there was an insight around the Terra Rozier bet props that if you put $25,000 on they immediately know that. Like apparently the NBA knew that when it happened like a year or so ago. So that's been ongoing thing. Terra Rozier I believe when the Hornets signed him after trading for Kimba, that was a 3-year, $63 million deal. There's no way that whatever operation he was in was going to net him more than the game checks he's going to get. So that's like the psychology of it is really interesting to me, as well as like, that was a max at the time for a player. He was in his first 4 years, and we give him the keys to the franchise essentially because we traded him for our franchise player. Anyways, I wish him well. I think the NBA has, or in all these sports leagues, man, there's much more that we don't know around results. I still contend that the World Cup was fixed. I don't know how, this is the Ronaldo fan in me, man. I don't know how Messi, won. That game was interesting. I'm like, something going on with that game. Because all the lead up was all about how the human rights violations, and all of a sudden we get this World Cup that's amazing with this final that's like, yeah. But anyways, that's just my conspiracy theorist side of me. But yes, I mean we covered everything that was on our list that we set out. Any parting words? What's going on after the GA this week? What's going on in your life this week? So we got a little situation happening that we're hanging out with, and that we're hanging out in Vegas this week as well. So we'll be traveling. But yeah, any big thing coming up for you this week before travel included? Yeah, you're on mute. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Nothing crazy. Just kind of wrapping up a couple of things at work. And then, like you said, we have handled some business over in Vegas.
Yeah.
I think with the, what's it called? The state senate. Yeah. No, I mean, nothing new from that perspective. We have not. The next time we will be in session is going to be late November.
Okay.
And from what I've heard, I don't believe we're actually going to meet in late November. And so I've been told to expect not to do any work really until after the primaries, which is crazy. Again, in all of the United States, there are 2 states without a budget. North Carolina is one of them. And it's not like it's Democrats arguing against Republicans. Republicans are in charge. If they agree, they could pass a budget. In fact, we still can't. Kind of tells you, honestly, the place that the Republican Party, especially locally, the incompetence of government. And so
Yeah, they don't even need the votes and they still can't pass it. I didn't know that.
Well, hopefully we'll get called back into session. There's a ton of Medicaid rebates and a ton of things that we need to be doing.
Okay. Interesting.
I mean, I'm not going to hold my breath, but hopefully we can get back to work and do what our constituents are asking of us.
Period. For me, the first 3 days of the week, I'm going to this conference called the Independent Sector Summit, which I believe is a nonprofit consortium of sorts where folks are coming together, talk about funding opportunities, talk about just like the nonprofit sector ecosystem. But interestingly, there's a couple of strategy conversations. There's a training tomorrow from 10 to 3 that I'm going to be in on around policy advocacy, given all of the the policy thing. So I'm really excited to go to that training because that's something I've been contending with, like as far as like putting together a legislative agenda for our organization. Now that my manager and lead, and then so there's there's a few training sessions that I'm excited to engage with over the week there. And then I'm also gonna be doing a lot of research on commercial affordability models. Just generally, because we're doing some projects around how do we create or introduce things at a local level that are going to be able to help businesses get into brick and mortar spaces, Black businesses specifically, get into brick and mortar spaces and stay there. And how do we, like create a pipeline where things can be a little bit more affordable on the commercial side that's heavily privately led. So that's I'm excited. Obviously, saying going to be out traveling, but yeah, that's my week, and excited to report back next time we have a conversation.
Cool. Well, until then, I'm sure stuff will pop up, but I guess we'll be back next week.
Yep, we'll be back. All right. See ya.